Now we've come to the end of the knitting, and on each pattern it says to block out your squares, and I know lots of you have already done that, but just in case you haven't and you're not quite sure where to begin, I'm just going to do a really quick tutorial to show you how I block out my squares. You may have your own preferred method eventually, but at least this would give you a starting point. So I've got these blocking mats, which are, I think they're sort of a foam, I'm not quite sure what they are, but they're like a foam, they're squidgy, and they come in a pack of 9, and you can slot them together to make a bigger mat if you wanted to. And you know, you can just use them over and over again because the pins just go into the foam, and then you know, you take them out and the hole almost closes up again. So they do last such a long time. I think I've had these about 5 years now. And what I tend to do is I'll have a look at the pattern and see how big I need to stretch out my square to, and in this instance it's 20 by 20 centimeters. So my square is still dry at the moment, I haven't wet it yet. So I tend to do it this way because I find that if I completely wet the square first, then I start pinning it out. If you go too big with your square, you can overstretch the stitches, and then you know, it can almost be ruined really. So I tend to do it dry, so at least if I make a mistake and take the pins out, it'll just go back to how it was because I haven't wet it yet. So I'm going to pop a pin in the top corner, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tape measure and I'm going to measure where 20 centimeters is on my mat. So I'm just going to make a little note of that there. Well, I'm just putting my finger there, and then I get the opposite corner and I stretch it down. Try and keep a straight line, because the good thing about these mats is they've got little crisscrosses on, so you can get a nice straight line. So that's one corner at 20 centimeters. I'm going to do the same across the top. So you know, look how small it looks, but really the edges are slightly curled under, so you know, there's so much give in that you're not overstretching it at all to get to that 20 centimeters. So again, it's about there. We can adjust all of this. It doesn't have to be completely perfect at the beginning, but can you see now how much bigger the square is looking? And then I'm going to get the opposite corner again and go to 20 centimeters, which is roughly there. Yep, it looks in line with the other side. And then I'm just going to pop a pin in there. So now each pin is 20 centimeters apart, more or less. Oh, maybe not. Maybe that one needs to be over a little bit more. Let's have a look. There we go. A bit more down on that. So you just keep checking until you're happy that your pins, your corners of your square and those pins are approximately 20 centimeters apart. And like I said, your square isn't wet, so it doesn't really matter if you have to take the pins out, it'll just spring back to where it was before. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch out these sides so that they're all lovely and straight, and I've got these lines, like I said, to guide me. And if you don't have a blocking mat and you're just using, you know, a cushion or a towel, just get a ruler and make sure, or something straight that you can follow a nice straight line against. So can you see now I've got a lovely straight line, and then I'm going to gently pull out the sides of the square, working down a nice straight line, and just pop in these pins. These are just regular pins, by the way. I haven't got any special pins for this because the yarn is quite thick, isn't it? It's a nice thickness of yarn, so these pins are not going to spoil anything. But if you were blocking out something a bit more delicate, like a shawl or something like a 4-ply, you might want to buy some thinner pins, because then you won't end up with holes in your knitting. Can you see how thin those pins are compared to a regular pin? I don't know if you can see that, but they are much thinner. But for this, we're absolutely fine with regular pins. So I'm just gently pulling this square so that the sides are all nice and straight. And can you see instantly how much different and more square it's starting to look. Again, you don't have to be completely perfect at the moment, because we can move things around as we see fit. And your square's nice and dry, so you don't need to worry that you're ruining anything at all, and all your lovely knitting won't get ruined. So I'm just going to check again and make sure that I'm on the right lines for a 20 by 20 metre square. So 20 across. So I just check at various intervals. That just needs pulling up a little bit. So you might just need a few more pins. You know, it does take a while. It's quite enjoyable actually, because this is going to make your knitting look absolutely gorgeous as well. You might need more pins down the side than you do across the top, because these edges tend to curl, especially if you've knitted in stocking stitch. The knitting can curl under just a little bit. I think I just need a bit more attention on this other side. So you can just have a play around until you feel that you've got enough pins in the square to make it all perfectly straight. And I think we're almost there with that one. So I'm just going to check again that I've not gone over. Nope. Right, so I've got my square now, and it's 20 by 20 centimetres. So now I'm going to take my water bottle. This is just a little water bottle that I use for my blocking, and then I'm just going to spray all over the square first of all, just to get it even so that it's wet all over. And then what I do with my hands is I just press that water into the square so that it goes through and through to the back. So can you see now it's all nice and wet? And then maybe I'll just, you know, you do need it to be quite wet, otherwise it isn't going to block. And if you find that when you've left it to dry and you take the pins out that it springs back to the smaller shape that it was before, then you might need to block it a second time. So I just gently press that water in, and then if I need to, if I think it's too wet, I can just get the towel and just press it on really carefully, just to lift a little bit of the water off. So it is quite wet now, so therefore it will take quite a while to dry, usually overnight. If it's sunny and you pop it into the sun, then it might dry quicker. But just leave it now, just leave it until it feels completely dry. And then once it's dry and you take those pins out, you've got a beautiful square that's 20 times 20 centimetres. So that's one method of doing it, where you pin it out dry and then you spray it with your water and you leave it to dry completely. The other method is that you could put some water into a bowl, and you, if you want to, if you're using a wool yarn, you can use a little wool wash, and that will help to you know, plump the fibres up really nicely, and also it'll smell really nice. But if you haven't got wool wash, you can just use something like a nice hand wash or a shampoo or something like that, but only a mild one, nothing too strong. And then what you would do is you pop water into your bowl, and then you would immerse your square in and just gently press so that it gets all you know, the water is soaked into the wool. And then once you feel that it's wet, you can leave it there for about 10 or 15 minutes. Gently take it out, but don't, you know, squeeze it like that. You must never do that. What you have to do is, if it's big, you could kind of just fold it into a little square like that and just gently squeeze out the water like that. Or you could just leave it flat and just gently squeeze the water out in between your hands. And then you can pin it out onto your blocking mat. So there's two ways there you can do it. Some people say don't bother with acrylic yarn blocking out things, but I treat acrylic yarn exactly the same as a wool because it lasts longer. There's no reason why you shouldn't block acrylic yarn. The only thing I would say is that you can steam block, so you would use an iron and use the steamer of an iron to block yarn out, but I tend to avoid that, because with wool, if your iron is too hot, you can shrink the fibres, and then that's it, it's completely ruined. And with acrylic, if you use a hot iron on acrylic, it will stretch the fibres, and again, it's completely ruined. So I just use either of these two methods: pin it out dry, spray it, and then leave it, or pop some water in a bowl with wool wash if you want to. You don't have to have wool wash, and then squeeze out gently, don't wring, and then pin out the square. Again, it'll be wet, so just take your time and pin it out flat. And I would do that whether you're using acrylic yarn, whether you're using a wool or a cotton wool mix. Just stick to this method, and you're more likely not to ruin your knitting. So I hope that helps with your blocking.